pray. If you have come to celebrate Halloween with a costume today and are willing to rise or raise your hand so we can recognize you, please do so. To me, Halloween is one of the most sacred holidays, and it is so because it celebrates fear. And being a chicken, it's easy to want fear to be celebrated. And most scholars believe that, in a sociological way, that religion began with the understanding of human beings that one day we must die. And so we really wanted to explore the idea of a God, to explore that concept. Do I move on from this life after death? A second reason that called so much awareness to this idea of the divine is this idea of fear. When it's most dark, when I am most unclear, when I am stepping most into the unknown, can I believe in a power greater than myself? So, in this sense, fear can be like an alarm clock to God, can't it? Maybe there's some use in it after all. The Psalms, which means the Songs in the ancient Hebrew text, scholars believe to be the most old part of the Bible because it comes from a time before reading and writing, where the best way to send a message and to retain it was through song. They say, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of who shall I be afraid? When evildoers came upon me to devour me, even my enemies and those who hate me, they together stumbled and fell. Though a host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this I will be confident. One thing I have asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the delight of the Lord and to be in charge of his temple." So fear indeed can wake us up to this idea that we are supported by a greater presence, no matter what's taking place in our lives. There's a new book out by a diplomat. His name is Aaron David Miller, and it's called "The End of American Greatness." Uh-oh. Why America Can't Have and Doesn't Want Another Great President. And he gives a good argument in his book that what makes a great president and separates them from the good presidents or the bad presidents is a great crisis. And the reason we wouldn't want another great president is because we wouldn't want another great crisis. Now, I'm not saying I completely agree with him, but it's an interesting point. And he says that there's only been 3 great presidents. The first, he tells us, is George Washington, who helped establish the Republic. The second, he tells us, is Abraham Lincoln, who helped end slavery. And the third, he tells us, is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who helped steer the country through the Great Depression and through the majority of World War II. And I've always struggled with what's become probably one of the best known quotes in the American lexicon. It's the phrase from Roosevelt, "There is nothing to fear but fear itself." And I don't know about you, but I've always struggled with that one because it makes no sense to me. Fear to me is a signal. It's an alarm. It's a direction that says caution. Be careful. And yes, there are times when fear can be scary, especially if I'm walking through a dark space, but there's also times where it can be exhilarating, like I'm about to come out in a chicken suit and stand in front of you. So it's the times where the message of fear can be quite strong, and fear can be a really good thing. And I've got to tell you, I've got a long list, being a chicken, of things that I'm afraid of. Dark spaces, loud noises, mean people, some politicians that we were talking about. There's a lot of things that can scare me. But one of the things that I know as well is that the mind is a very powerful thing. And perhaps when I get afraid, it's not so much a sign of negativity, but of my body and my mind working on my behalf. There's a bit of a scary story that the great psychologist Carl Jung used to tell. And Carl Jung's probably one of the most respected scholars ever of this thing called the subconscious or subjective realm, where we would say fear comes from. He says, an acquaintance of mine once told me a dream in which he stepped out into space from the top of a mountain. You ever have that dream before? I explained to him something of the influence of the unconscious and warned him against dangerous mountaineering expeditions, for which he had a regular passion. But he laughed at such ideas. A few months later, while climbing a mountain, he actually did step off into space and was killed. Scary. That's the end of the story. There's something more to it. But it speaks to the power of our minds. We should listen to these things. Alfred Hitchcock said, fear isn't so difficult to understand. After all, weren't we all frightened as children? Nothing has changed since Little Red Riding Hood faced the big bad wolf. What frightened us today is exactly the same sort of thing that frightened us yesterday. It's just a different wolf. This fright complex is rooted in every individual. So perhaps maybe it isn't so much fear that's the issue, but it's the attachment of fear that can cause problems in our life. Certainly I can think of things that I used to be afraid of that I'm not so afraid of anymore. 12-year-old girls used to seem a lot more ferocious to me than now. The Nightmare on Elm Street movies used to seem a lot more scary to me than they do now. But some serious things as well, stepping into a relationship, stepping into being a speaker, stepping into my own power. Some of those things aren't as frightening to me as they used to be. So perhaps it isn't fear that's the problem, but living our lives in fear that can be destructive and the problem. Don't we know those people, the difference between those people that live from faith in their lives and those who live their lives based on fear? They're shaking all the time. They don't think you should do anything fun ever. They're always worried, always in damage control mode, because fear is at the center of their lives. Perhaps this is the dangerous thing that can happen. How many people watch the Roosevelt's documentary on PBS? Oh, a lot of folks here, all 100 hours of it? I really wanted to watch it because I wanted to learn more about this statement about fear itself. And the biggest thing I was corrected upon is, for some reason, I always thought that Roosevelt said there's nothing to fear but fear itself the day after Pearl Harbor was attacked. In his address to Congress, I had always thought that for some reason. And by that being true in my mind, it made me kind of not put down the statement, but I know that Roosevelt knew that World War II was going to happen before there was an attack on Pearl Harbor. I know he was surprised by that attack, but I always thought by that statement he meant, don't worry, we'll get everyone together, everything will be okay. But I was wrong. He made that statement in his first inaugural address in 1933, moving into the heights of the Great Depression, which is a very frightening time. It had to be for Roosevelt, too, to have this time in American history where the greatest fears of man could possibly be realized, because at any point we could start living from the worst of ourselves, because survival was getting that hard to accomplish. It was powerful just to me listening to our own Dorothy Lance, who spoke at the service on Wednesday about growing up through the Depression and how vital it was for survival to pull together, and that there were still even great losses in the process. To give Roosevelt's full statement, he says, "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. In every dark hour of our national life, a leadership of frankness and vigor is met with that understanding and support of the people themselves, which is essential to victory." And there might be a lot of people here who disagree with some of Roosevelt's method once he took office to transform things, but it's hard to argue with his speaking to the importance of collective vision, collective faith, and to be willing to sacrifice our own individual fears to give into a life where we can accomplish something greater. He says, "Happiness lies not in the mere possession of money. It lies in the joy of achievement, in the thrill of creative effort." So Roosevelt, to me, understood what we would call spirituality 101 in so many different ways. That to live consistently from fear is to live destructively. Yet to live constructively from faith is to give ourselves the best opportunity to create a brighter tomorrow, even if it doesn't appear possible today. It is through that faith in a greater power, in a greater good within each of us, in a greater possibility of what can take place around us, that we lay not just the spiritual, but the conscious and practical foundation for living a better life. Ernest Holmes would say around the same time, the consciousness which we wish to establish in our thought is a consciousness that there is such a complete union between the spirit, which is God, and the mind, which is also our mind, that this unity forever enables the consciousness of peace, the consciousness of power, the consciousness of wholeness to enter our minds. We do not wish to be controlled by the fluctuating thought of people around us, feeling one day that life is not worth living and feeling the next day possibly elated, only to fall down the following day, tripping ourselves over our own emotions. We want to keep on an even keel, as it were. We should be happy morning, noon, and night. But how can we be happy if we are afraid? I love Ernest Holmes, but don't you want to just stick your tongue out at him sometimes? Happy guy. It's up to each of us not to deny our fear, but to listen to our fear, to gather the good information that it has to bring us, and then to let it go. Then to step into that faith. And that faith is not something common to all of us. It's something each of us must uniquely cultivate in our own way. Last week we talked about sharing, and we talked about the danger of being in judgment of someone or trying to direct someone a certain way. And I wasn't practicing what I preached about a month ago because I was talking with a friend and he was sharing with me in a very vulnerable way his fear of death. And I have a fear of death too, and so as opposed to just listening to where he was at, I was kind of going on my own trip, and I was thinking of something that really inspired me, that Don Kepke, who is the husband of Judy Kepke, who's here today, was speaking to our practitioner body, and he said something quite profound. He said, you know what? Every night when you go to sleep, it's kind of like dying a little bit, because we have to practice letting go. And I thought that was so profound, and I shared it with my friend, and I could see his face just turn white. I could see him go, delete, delete, I wish he didn't tell me that, I wish I didn't tell me that, delete, delete, take it away. You know, he wasn't ready for what I was obviously working with at the time. I hope he's doing okay, I haven't seen him too many times since. But each of us in our own way, we have to address our own faith. You know, do I believe in a love in my life that's greater than fear? Do I believe in a power that's greater than myself when I can no longer hold the burdens of my own life? Do I believe that I am related to something infinite, even when I'm experiencing myself as not? Do I believe there is a solution to any problem, even though it is not visible at this time? It's by establishing that faith and living from it that we give ourselves the best possible opportunities, not just for God to act, but to step into being our most true and powerful selves. Holmes continues, he says, it does not matter what we are afraid of, whether it is poverty, pain, misunderstanding of the future or the world in which we live. A man cannot be happy who takes objective life too seriously. It is impossible to be happy if we allow ourselves to become hypnotized by negative suggestion, whether of the individual minds which we contact or of the race mind in which we live. Therefore, we have to do something to keep out unhappy thoughts. Something that I learned about Roosevelt's words about fear itself is that they weren't quite original to him. You only have to go about 60 years or so back to find the following quote from Henry David Thoreau. He said, "Nothing is so much to be feared as fear." And Thoreau is one of the great early American intellectuals who believed strongly in man's relationship with nature and the importance of government to have a strong relationship with justice and right action, and of the importance of the individual to claim his or her individuality and to be willing to walk to the beat of his or her own drummer. And this speaks to the importance of fear, not in the sense of being that signal, but being a way of life we fall into when we stop trusting in our own selves to do what's best for ourselves, to do what's best for the person next to us. When we get to such a degree that we live stagnant, still, allowing life to pass us by, missing who we are, then we really lose touch with that part of who we are. Roosevelt, in his last inaugural address, would quote Thoreau's great mentor, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he'd say, "We have learned the simple truth, as Emerson said, that the only way to have a friend is to be one. We gain no lasting peace if we approach it with suspicion and mistrust or with fear. We can gain it only if we proceed with the understanding, the confidence, and the courage which flows from conviction." Ernest Holmes, in our Declaration of Principles, he says that we believe in the individual soul forever evolving. That means that we are always moving forward. But a way of describing this might be to say that fear moves us backwards and faith moves us forwards. So when we are looking at our lives and we are saying, where am I moving forward in my life? Where am I getting along? That's where you will find your faith. And when you look at those areas, maybe in your relationships, maybe in your work, maybe in your own self-talk where you feel held back, that's where your fear is. It's important for us to be able to identify where our faith has been, because some of us are living such courageous lives, but we've stopped thinking about it. We don't give ourselves the credit that we deserve to be living as the whole beings where we are. And yet there are those areas in our lives where we may be calling for help from ourselves as well. To have that belief that, yes, I am related to a power that is infinite and greater than I am, and I can use it constructively. Yes, there is love in the face of even dying. Yes, peace is possible even in the midst of chaos, even within my own consciousness. To be willing to sow those seeds for a greater faith in our lives is, again, to give ourselves the best opportunity to experience not only the best possible life, but life as it may truly and actually be. So just taking a moment of chicken prayer here. Just recognizing that wherever there is fear in our lives, let it again just be a message to wake us up to God. Let it mean nothing more or nothing less, but to remind us to check in with that which we truly have faith in, not which we speak lip service to, but what we truly choose to live in accordance with each day of our lives. If there is anywhere within ourselves where we are lacking this faith, let us commit to practicing it more fully. Let us name fully and clearly the qualities of what that means: inspiration, healing, forgiveness, strength, listening, whatever it may be for you. Know what it is. Know that as we better embody these qualities, we let the mask that fear has perhaps inspired us to build to hold ourselves back, to melt away, to live more in accordance as our thriving truth. Embracing this thriving truth for myself, I invite each of us to do the same. Living from it is the most powerful thing in the world and the greatest gift we can give ourselves and those around us. And so it is. Amen.
So it is.
Thank you for your time, everybody. Very excited.